how to deal with artificial intelligence. So my aim in this is to try to make it as easy as possible to understand. Even if you don't know much about computers or you don't have a cell phone, you don't know where this is all going, everybody has already been affected by this. And everybody who continues to live in this world is going to be affected by it because this is not going away. In fact, I was just looking at a little model of the new cell phone for, I think it's called the i6, which would be, I don't know what the i5 was about, but this one's supposed to be really on the wave of artificial intelligence, showing you what can be done if you go along with it. So the areas of interest in this class will be, I want to give you an introduction, and I'm not assuming that you did see the first talk on this or the lecture. I want to talk about bringing the world into your life. That will be the focus of our class this morning. And I want to talk a little bit, if we have time, on the impact of AI and our use of imagination. Now, everybody should be somewhat familiar with the dashboard of a car. And I'm sure that you know that on the dashboard of a car, even if it's not a modern car, it will show you some lights about what's happening. It will tell you if your doors are locked. There'll be a little sign on there, come on, a little red light to tell you if it isn't the case. It will tell you if your car's running. It will tell you how fast your engine's turning over. It will tell you the amount of gasoline you have and how much you might be able to drive on what you've got left. It'll tell you about whether your air conditioning's on and what do you want to set, what level you want to set it. And all of this is because engineers have been able to develop little sensors that can monitor temperature, that can monitor a little float in your gas tank or some other means of which they do it. All those are being fed into your panel on the front of your car so that you can see this. That's AI at work, artificial intelligence. So when we look at this, I want just to review this. I think some of you saw this, well, if you saw the lecture, you obviously saw it before, but this is what it can do. This is what computers and running these algorithms, which they call them, which are just little programs that do things. It can, for instance, read and summarize an article. So it knows, understands English or any other language that I should imagine there's most of the major languages are that way now. It can write. So if you set the things in order that must happen, it can write for news organizations. You might think it's a person, it might have a code name or something, but it could just be a computer that's writing. It can see and analyze and decide. So it's not only looking at something and trying to tell you how much space you have between what's behind you and your back bumper, but it can maybe give you a warning light if you got too close. That's just AI at work. It can hear and understand. So it could hear my voice and understanding what I'm saying, it could react to it. That's where they are with hearing. It can speak and converse with humans. So it can be in a conversation going back and forth. It can smell. This is one I didn't realize until I looked up all the features it can do. And the smelling it is doing is detecting diseases of all things. It can touch. For instance, it can very delicately pick raspberries. You have to be very delicate to pick a raspberry or you crush it and it falls out. So yeah, a computer can arrange through a robot to pick raspberries, just giving the right pressure and giving the right sort of swing of its hand. It can move and drive robots, so it can be there like a head that's directing it. It can detect human emotions by looking at the expression on your face and telling whether you're interested or not, as you all have an expression on your face right now. It can play games with humans and win. So the computer's getting better and better, and people who are playing games would know that the games get more complicated and the computer can win, so it's quite a competition. It can debate. It can listen to what you're saying and look at forming a response and get back within a reasonable time, so it would be like actually debating a person. It can create visual arts and poetry. Now you can see how this is interfering with a lot of careers. When computers can do things, they can do them better and faster, so you sort of wonder what's going to happen. And the last, it can read your mind. Now that's a science which is developing, but they have a computer program that works on what sort of electronic signals your mind or your head's giving outside of your brain. It can pick it up and can read it. Now, if you put all those things together in a robot that can write, read, see, hear, speak, smell, touch, move, detect, play, debate, create, and read your mind, that's a formidable, it's a formidable helper, but it's also a formidable weapon. There's many things can be done with that. And because we are at the base of this, with all these things now happening together, and there is really no world authority that's directing this, nobody is really directing it. Various countries are actually competing in this. In a country, the companies are competing in this. So where it's going, no one knows. No one knows what's going to happen, who's going to develop something that's going to make something else obsolete before it's even got out on the market. It's going to be a very, very turbulent time unless our God intervenes. Now, AI is linked to the love of money. It's a driving force for AI. So the companies have learned that if they can do something better with a robot than people can do, for instance, the robot's not going to go on strike. The robot's going to work 24 hours a day. It may not even matter whether there's any lights on. It can continue to do its work. It's going to challenge the people that are doing it now, and it has. So you look at certain plants that are, say, assembling vehicles, and what you just see is a whole lot of robots. You look around to see if there's anybody in there. Well, where were all the people that did that before the robots came? Well, they've had to find other jobs. And maybe they're still looking. Like it could be really something that we forcibly enter into our life if it happens to us. And it's driven by the love of money. See, what people have never controlled necessarily in their own life, when it's on a bigger scale with a man like Elon Musk, who is, billionaire, who knows if he's approaching a trillionaire, but very, very wealthy, influential people, you don't know just where things are going. But this is an area where it's more alarming for us as Bible students, because I'm really not that interested in trying to illustrate what's happening technically, but just how this is going to influence us as an ecclesia and Christadelphians in general, who are striving for particular goals in life and goals that are not being supported on this. So this idea of deep fake. Now, I thought it was football that we're talking about to start with, but no, it's a definition in Merriam-Webster, which, they do have these things defined. The old maximum, things aren't always as they seem, seems more true than ever in the age of deep fakes. A deep fake is an image or a video audio recording that has been edited using an algorithm to replace the person in the original with someone else, especially a public figure, in a way that makes it look authentic. Okay, it's a fake. The fake in deep fake is transparent. Yeah, it's a fake. They call it a fake. But then they go on to say, the deep is less self-explanatory. This half of the term is specifically influenced by deep learning, that is, machine learning using artificial neural networks with multiple layers of algorithms. So this would never have happened without AL. But just think of what that would happen if someone took your face and put it in a story or something of somebody caught in a crime, and it's your face, and it looks real. You really can't tell it doesn't belong to the body or that there's something being done. You say, well, who would ever think of that? Well, they certainly have thought of it, and they're having to deal with it. And young people in school have learned how to do that about people in their own class. And you can just think of how that would destroy your character if here's this Bible student. Yeah, we've always thought this was the Bible student. We've heard them speaking, etc. Let's take their face and put them in something that will really embarrass them. But where's the laws? Well, it's happening so quick that a lot of laws haven't been formed yet. People haven't seen the criminal element and the way it can destroy somebody. You know, we've been looking at this book, The Death of Truth, and talking about it for some years now. And the proverb associated with it, to buy the truth and to sell it not. In other words, value truth and don't just consider it something that comes and goes. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding, or again, to rightly divide the word of truth, to spend our time to prepare ourselves, approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Those two ideas, which have been in our community and in Bible students' minds for as long as the Bible's been written, are really at risk of being forgotten and just sort of trampled by the way people are going for things that aren't true. You know, there's a whole topic on that. I don't really want to get into that, but all you have to do is just watch the political scene out there in this US election. Somebody recorded the number of lies that Trump has actually put on the air in the speeches he's given, and it's something like 30,000. So they've recorded and documented them, the number of lies he's told. And it's not that people have said, well, we don't want a liar, throw him out. They still love him. Well, that tells you what's happening to truth. People can just say, oh, yeah, he's a liar. Well, I guess we all are liars, so let's look at something else and let's not focus on the fact that he tells lies. And so in the debate that was recently had, people tallied it up and how many lies were told, and they were told by both sides. Do people really care, or does it matter to them? That's what's at stake, and that's why we're so interested in it. Now, I put a little bit of this in this just to illustrate, if any of you think you're not affected by this, I think we should have a look at just how subtle it is. So the present use of AI in Bible study for good, because there's always a for good and a for evil in what I'm going to say this morning in class here. So that's the little icon that comes up in my word processor when it comes to Bible study. It's eSword. Yeah, it's wonderful. It quickly compares Bible passages in different English translations. That's taken such a big time. You don't even have all those various versions on your bookshelf, but to get up and get them and read, what does it say in the ESV? What does it say in the NET? What does it say in the RSV? What does it say in these old versions? All you got to do is just flick a switch or click a key, and you've got another version, same verse. Or you can put them all together on the screen and look at them that way. Now, has anybody seen anything wrong with that? Haven't most of us used it and seen its capabilities? So that seems to be fine. It finds every reference containing a particular word, phrase, or combination of words in seconds. So if you can remember something, but you have no idea where it is, and it's little words, it's not a key word. There must be hundreds of places where those words, but you look at 3 words in sequence, and you've narrowed it down, and it can find it quickly. That saves a lot of time. That keeps you doing your Bible study. You don't get to the point where you get so frustrated you can't find something you know would be the passage you want. It finds every reference to a particular word in Hebrew, Greek. Like, we don't know Hebrew and Greek, most of us. But if we wanted to say, well, that Hebrew word is the key word, it's translated different things, but since it's the same Hebrew word and we know what it means, I'd like to find out where else it's used. That's often the case. It can find it. We don't know anything about Hebrew or Greek, but we can still use it. Anyone going to argue with that? No, that's for good. It finds various historical maps of different countries, cities, and places from Bible times in seconds. And if you happen to have a Bible program on your computer, which gives you pictures, you can find pictures in seconds of things in the Holy Land that you'd have to go over there to visit to see it. Like, it's just a wonderful world that I didn't grow up in when I was young. None of this was available. Some of you know that because you grew up in a world that didn't have that to start with. The young people are growing up and this has always been available. So we got that problem to deal with because in some cases we sort of speak ways and about things that our young people don't understand. But here's the subtlety. There is a sense in which this is also for evil, something bad about it. First of all, when you go into the ability to go into different translations and find them so fast, you are probably going to find a translation that says what you think it means. Now, I think I'd be guilty of that. I think most Bible students and people who have presented talks are probably likewise guilty of that if there's a guilt involved, in that you found the version that really supports what you think that means, even though most of the others don't. We didn't have that problem. We just had the King James. When I started off my Bible study, there was the RSV, the RV, and the King James. We could choose between them, and we did use them a little, but nothing like the mushroom of versions there are today. And so people could go from one to the other, and you're dealing with someone who's trying to prove something, and you say, well, this person's always jumping around in the Bibles they use. That's just one of the problems that has came by way of this device that's able to get us into various Bibles so quickly. And I've had to deal with this in business many years ago when I was in business. We are inclined to keep up with the latest innovations and thus become dependent on technology for our Bible study. Now, I noticed that first in business. We started off with very, primitive computers. I had an Apple II Plus. I still have that Apple II Plus, and all it could do is play a couple simple games and do a few things, and it had a 48K memory. So it couldn't do much of anything. So it wasn't really useful, but it illustrated what was coming. And then they started to come. And they came so fast that the people writing software for these new computers were producing software that only worked with the new computer. If you wanted to compete in this field, which you're in business, you had to have the latest computer. Well, what do you do with the old one? Or the old free ones you have that cost you an arm and a leg? There was nothing you could do with them but throw them up. They still ran. They still did what they were designed to do, but they didn't do what was the latest. And the latest was such an improvement that without it, in business, you're left behind. So you had to keep up. Now, there's something like that in Bible study. When people find there's some new device that you can take with you, like I found a lot of people now do their readings on a cell phone. not got to that point. I hope I never get to that point of doing my readings on the cell phone. But it's just so handy because you're sort of like an outside brain. And everywhere you go, you use this cell phone. I don't think I would want to do that. But you see, that's where we are in this. We've got to make decisions as to whether we want to go that way or we don't. And the problem with that is that we tend to divide on it. Like some people think it's okay and some people don't. Some people have them and some people don't. Also, we get caught up in the views of writers who publish rather than the results of personal Bible study. Like it's so much easier just to go to somebody else that wrote upon this. So we can call up Christadelphian works. We can go into the Christadelphian magazine very quickly on our computers and find out what Robert Roberts said about this 100 years ago or more. And you think, maybe he knows more than I do, and I don't really have that much time. I'm going to find out what he says, and that's going to be what I use because it's Christadelphian. But we didn't do any Bible study. Now, I think that's one of the greatest evils we've got to fight against, is that we tend always to go with what's easiest. And the things that have to be worked on, and you go to bed and I still didn't get the answer. So there was a whole night. You didn't get what you were looking for. So you have to spend another night on it. And you're always thinking, I could just go to some book, or I could go to some other writing, or maybe look at the commentaries that are on this computer program. That's the temptation. But I guess the biggest one is that if that's the way we go and we depend upon our computer, what happens when the lights go out, when the power is off? Now, where we live, the power goes off quite often. We have maybe a dozen times in a year, the power goes off. A storm comes, the power's off. And it's going to take a couple hours. If your battery's up, it's okay, just run battery. But if the battery isn't up, it just brings to your mind, what would happen if there was no power at all? I can't do my Bible study. I've always depended on the computer. All my programs are in there. My talk's in the computer. And I can't get it out because I don't have power in my computer. Doesn't that mean something to us? Doesn't it tell us that maybe it should have been in our head? But it wasn't. That's the way we're going with AI. Just before I go into this next section here, I was noting, and maybe I can have a slide on this in one of the coming talks, that the places called the cloud, you store your memory in a cloud, and people wondered for a while if there was a cloud up there somewhere that they could store information on. No, it's a building somewhere where there's a whole lot of computers that store your data. But storing the data for AI has required huge resources, such that one manufacturer or builder of a building decided they were going to have to build a nuclear reactor to provide enough power to run the building, to service everybody that's using it. Now that presents maybe a technical side to this that we don't normally look into, but it's a huge problem that people are facing. Now, I want you to think of this, and I don't know how we're going to go on this for time, but I'll try to get to the end of this at least today. We can do the other things on our next day, Lord willing. But I want to take you through this because everything that I'm going to put on here has a good side to it and a bad side to it. So that people have always, who wanted to maintain a life with respect to God and respect to his word, have had to make a choice whether it was for good or for evil, and then decide what they're going to do about it. But how many of us ever looked at some of these inventions? Now, I bring it on here because even though it happened in 1440, which was a long time ago, still, when we go to school or when we think of what we might do with our time, we have to make the same decision. What was achieved in the printing press has to be evaluated. Is it for good or for evil? Well, for good. Now those who know how to read English can read the Bible for themselves. If you've ever seen some of the problems, or read about the problems that people were facing before they had Bibles to read from, it was you had to listen to someone else tell you what the truth was, and there wasn't too much truth in what they said. And people didn't know that because they weren't allowed to read it for themselves. But when William Tyndale made it his life's work to get an English Bible out there so people can read it in English so that the plowman, person behind the plow, could know more than the Pope, that brought it on, even though he paid for that with his life. That was the way it was. And yes, now people can read the Bible for themselves. They're able to understand the gospel for themselves. I've read it. You've read it. What do we think about it? Never mind what other people tell us about it, but just what do we think about it ourselves? And they can find the way to live forever. That's been a wonderful thing for good, the printing press that has allowed us to have a Bible of our own. But when you have a printing press, you can go to a library and not necessarily pick up the Bible. You could pick up the Social Contract by Rousseau, and you could read this and think about what is really being said there, about the value of the majority of the people always making the decisions, which is the basis of democracy. So we don't listen to one man speak, we decide by the majority rule. That can be very convincing, because in certain aspects of our ecclesia, we do run also by the majority rule. How many people are in favor of it? And if it's, what size is the kitchen going to be? Well, we just go with the majority. We allow that. But when it comes to what the Bible teaches, we all believe the same things. But they can also read the elements of geology by Lyell. And that's very evident even today in the museums of the world. You go there and history and geology are determined by what people have said about it. And I can never miss the lie in Lyell. Like it seems to me that the word is a giveaway. The man didn't properly interpret what he saw. And only now are people being able to show the evidence that he was wrong. But they could also read The Origin of the Species by Darwin. So you see, there's a good and an evil to the printing press. It can be very good. We can be very thankful for the fact we have our Bible, but boy, we're not so sure we want The Origin of the Species too. But our children are just, maybe not just as likely, but they could pick up the book and read it, and without any direction, maybe think it's a pretty good book and has ideas to follow. We're going to always have to decide between good and evil. You look at the light bulb. Well, what could be wrong with a light bulb? 1920, the light bulb comes on for people who now have light in their house by a bulb. But children growing up, didn't we always have light bulbs? No, we surely didn't. And it was quite recent when you think of history that in 1920, it took that long for it. People had lamps that were in by oil and other things. So light can now be provided in one's home with the flick of a switch. It can be permanently located just where light is needed. So you don't put your lamps, or sometimes we do, take your lamps around the house and put them, you just put lamps where you're needed, by a chair where you normally sit to read, and that's the way it is. And people can utilize hours of darkness to read and learn. But that's the one you have to watch. It provided people with the ability to stay up later. So for evil, it also provided being able to work hours of darkness has led to shift work. You couldn't work all night in a plant without light. But now the light's there, and it's, they'll put more light in there if you need more light to do that kind of work. So people can work 24 hours. Well, we have to do it in shifts. Well, that's okay if someone else is doing the midnight shift, but if you're doing it, and as others have told us, right, Darren, it's kind of bad when you have to rotate shifts. You're on afternoons, then you're on midnights, then on day shift. Your mind just gets mixed up by it, but that's because there's light, and it's possible to do it. But artificial light uses energy and costs a lot of money. How long does it take for you to teach your children to turn the lights off? You don't need light, brilliant light in the daytime in the house if the sun's providing it. The light bulbs burn out and can be easily broken. We probably all found that by dropping one. So you can see you can take these subjects and you can divide between good and evil. And sometimes we focus on one or the other, missing the alternative. The ability to travel by car, 1908. Airplanes, 1914. Recent. But for children being born now, they probably think it's always been around. People can live great distances from their place of employment. A lot of us have found that. If you can't live in Ancaster because of the price of homes, well, you go somewhere where the prices are reasonable, and you get back and forth, either by driving or carpooling or taking the GO or whatever it might be. So people can travel far off places for short times, for commerce, events, or for pleasure. I think we have a group of our ecclesia, I think, that are out in the West Coast somewhere. They have found an occasion to be able to go away and enjoy it for good. When traveling, some people can take their homes with them. You know, it may not be actually taking a home and taking it off the concrete foundation, but what they take in a trailer, and some of these house trailers, is maybe even better than what they have in the home. But the evil about it is, with the ability to travel, families have spread around the world. The subtle part of youth conference was we have one daughter that lives in Australia. And now we have grandchildren that live in Australia. We have grandchildren that live in Germany. And people are going around the world because you can travel. Some people will look at that as good, and some people will look at that as being evil. Many people have had accidents and died while traveling. One of the ones that affected the Christadelphian community the most was that airplane that was bombed when it was flying over Scotland. And there was a young Christadelphian on that plane. He died in it. And it brought it to us that, yeah, you've got no assurance that you're going to necessarily have a soft landing. That's basically the criminal element that's out there today. For some, the desire for travel has become unsettling, expensive, and somewhat addictive. That's just typical of what we have to deal with. So there's an evil about it, and we've got to decide between those two. And it's going to be difficult to tell our children the difference. When they see it for good, sometimes the parents see the evil in it before they do. Now we'll just move on maybe a little quicker, but it's going to be hard to be quicker. And a lot of us, most of us would not remember the radio coming into our life, but because the radio is not that important to us. But I can remember it being important to us. I remember how my grandparents used to listen to the 11 o'clock news regularly. Every night, 11 o'clock news came on. They were there listening to what was happening around the world. Background music can be provided at particular times. That was a big thing for people who really only had a radio. This led to voice recording and the ability to preach the gospel in remote parts of the world. When I, in particular, did my first talks, I found that the way people did it was all the people who wanted a recording sat in the front row. And they all had their tape recorders with them, and they had microphones on the table. So there was just a lot of microphones around the top. And everybody came up and made sure that it was running. And it was an interesting thing to observe, but I'm glad it's over because it was really quite confusing. Radio broadcasters often use slang and offensive language. Now, you may not notice this, but I did, and a lot of you older ones would have noticed that it was okay to have the radio on, but when the person was using foul language and was describing things which were really embarrassing, didn't need to be put on the radio, you got to think, is this where this is going? Do I really want that in my house? And music, in the words of entertainers of the world, be brought to your ears in a way that you don't forget the tune. You find yourself outside somewhere and this tune comes into your mind. You only just heard it on the radio, but now it's in your mind. You sort of can't get it out of your mind. That was something I managed to witness to and did not like. The content of worldly life is often hard to put aside even when doing Bible study. See, that's a problem. You can't just turn your mind on and off. Like, you get pretty close to it. But the problem is that some of the things that you've been witnessing in the day will not let you concentrate when you sit down at night to do your work. It just keeps popping up in your mind. You keep on subconsciously thinking about something that's hindering you in doing good Bible study. Television was a bigger one again. And TV in general has proved to be a major element in bringing information to people. Like this was more important and significant than radio. And you will know that many waiting rooms have a TV on the wall to help people endure the pain of waiting. So you go into a doctor's office and you can't get into the waiting room because there's so many people in there. But if it wasn't for that screen, then it was just showing something that's happening, cars driving along a road or something, and there's several news items floating across the screen, it would be very difficult to sit that close together looking at someone across the wall, and you're doing that for a half hour before anything happens. So this invention has led to a number of people learning the truth of God's word. Like, there's been some very big TV campaigns. I remember the one that we had up in Barrie in 1978, and that would have cost about $100,000 to put that on. We were putting a TV program on CKVR at 3:00 in the afternoon. And, it's really quite interesting because there were never many people that went all the way with conversion due to TV. We found that people, at least this is the way it was expressed to me by another brother who was kind of frustrated in doing this work on TV. He said that people will tell you, look, I've done everything you've asked. I turn your program on, I listen to you. Isn't that enough? He'd never do anything more than that. They wouldn't come out to the meeting. They wouldn't do a Bible program preparing for the baptism or something. They wouldn't do that. They sort of felt that their life was full with what they were doing. So broadcasting by TV can reach millions, but it's a very expensive way to preach. And if you're up against sports like football, hockey, or something like that, most of the people will just turn away. Generally, watching the content offered on TV is trivial yet captivating and can lead us to waste a lot of quality time. And when my dad first brought a TV into our house, I was hooked on it immediately. I was hooked on radio because Foster Hewitt, some of you may know who I'm referring to, was such a good announcer of a hockey game. It was like you were watching it. And he became rather famous for it. And a lot of us sat around the radio to just experience how he described the game and thoroughly enjoyed it. But, it took precedence over other things that could have been done. So credit cards. Now we're running out of time here, and I'm going to try to get to the key one, which leads up to, but credit card is a very important one because of what you can do with a piece of plastic and don't have to have any cash in your pocket. And the credit company will issue a nicely designed and detailed statement of what you owe, send it to you monthly on time. But for evil, it's become a common practice for some to spend their money faster than it can be replenished. Too many people don't seem to realize that A credit card is a loan that has to be repaid, and at very high interest if you don't pay it off when you should. Spending money you don't actually possess is really a moral trap. And it was something that people, well, they still have to deal with it. And I know a few people that have not dealt very well with it, and it's been a burden all their life. A PowerPoint was, for me, a sensational creation because it finally helped me prepare a talk where I could take and put my points on little pieces of paper, so to speak, and have them all nicely arranged, and then put on another one which showed me all the pieces of paper on a screen. You could print them out if you wanted to, and then you could rearrange them. Now, I used to do that with pieces of paper, literally, write them on little pieces of paper and have sticky notes, and I had them all over the place, and I would try to rearrange them. And PowerPoint just took a lot of less time. I found it wonderful. Pictures can easily be added to a presentation that were not taken by the author. Now, you might see some of the evil in that immediately, but it's something I still do. You just have to be very careful about the picture. And Bible classes can be more easily composed, changed, saved, and duplicated when you're using that. But once it's complete, it can be used over and over without any further work by the author. Like it's like, I've finished my study, and if you want my talk on that, I'll give it to you again, even though it was 10 years ago. So we're not refreshing our head. We're just using what we did, and it's so nicely stored away with all the whistles and bells that we need, that we just do it again and do it again, do it again. We never really grow. We never go back to rethink it. We never add to it if you do it that way. The production can also be used by others with no original thought on their part. They just use it. Without a lot of work, the addition of pictures and Bible talks can be very distracting, and we'll talk about that again. Now, Facebook just keeps growing bigger and bigger. I think it's another bringing the world into your life, much more up to date. Many of our young people can identify with us. They know this. They have their own people they communicate with on Facebook. So it provides an opportunity to help people who otherwise would live a lonely life. It's provided easy access to a much greater audience to preach the truth. But for me, it can be an unwanted and an intrusive use of time and energy. If I had to just look at all the emails that come, I would probably never do much else than just look at emails. It can result in relationships that are unholy. Imagine meeting a person on Facebook that you've never seen in person, but you can see a picture of them and you can talk to them. And then finally end up marrying them because of the relationship entirely electronic. That's happened in Christadelphia. It can be the source of acquiring bad habits and corrupting information. So we've got to really think Facebook through. It's a huge organization. It's going to present, I think, a lot of challenges to people when you see what it can continue to do for, they say, good. Internet shopping, going shopping at the middle of the night, while all alone at home and dressed in pajamas. Jobs in warehouses created so that you can receive your purchase quickly with a great variety of consumer goods, pricing and payment so easy. It's just there and people are using it. But it's very attractive to spend more time in obtaining a deal. Jobs and careers have been lost, and the use of cell phones for reducing boredom has allowed businesses to stimulate the covetous spirit and those who allow themselves to be so entertained. So being entertained by looking at things that you can buy sometimes gives you the reason to buy something you would never otherwise buy. And then finally, this is the last one we'll put on this morning. Artificial intelligence for good. Yes, information sources have made it possible to have a world-class library in your home. People can now buy driverless cars and let AI do the work. Access to Zoom meetings where people don't have to leave their homes has its benefits. But it's changed the way people work and caused a lot of turmoil in many sectors of employment. AI is developing amongst competing nations and corporations. There is no clear mission or end in sight. Now it's affecting Bible students by offering to replace personal Bible study. Now that's where I want to take off next week, because that's sort of the preparation to get you to think. We always have to decide between the good and the evil. If we only focus on the good and we're blind to the evil, we're not being wise. And I want to talk about the Bible study involved and how this can get us into good and it can get into evil in our next program. Thank you.